Though The Twilight Zone popularised sci-fi horror in television way back in the 1950s, this blending of genres has remained popular and pertinent ever since. Sci-fi horror often delves into the unknown, whether it's alien life, parallel worlds, or time travel. People are naturally drawn to exploring the limits of human knowledge, especially when it's paired with a fear of the unfamiliar. The subgenre tends to horrify audiences, not just with violence, but with ideas, exploring the potential collapse of society, humanity's dwindling future, or the world's insignificance in the grand scheme of things can leave viewers utterly shaken. I'm Sean Ferrick with What Culture Horror, and here are the 10 best sci-fi horror shows ever made. Number 10. Swamp Thing. There are a few DC heroes weirder than Alec Holland, aka Swamp Thing, and that's saying a lot to be fair. After bonding with all plant life, Holland became an elemental called Swamp Thing and vowed to use his foliage powers to preserve the world's greenery. Due to the unconventional setup, adapting Swamp Thing to another medium sounds challenging, especially considering how terrible the 1980s films turned out. With that said, the 2019 series pulled it off. Rather than trying to make a traditional superhero tale, this version of Swamp Thing embraces the horror aspects of the source material. Also, some body horror effects are so convincing they're almost on par with John Carpenter's The Thing. The performances are stellar across the board, especially Crystal Reed, Will Patton, and of course, Derek Mears as the titular beast. Despite being slathered in an elaborate costume, Mears invokes an immense range of emotion, portraying the terrifying monster as a tragic figure. The lore in the comics is profoundly dense, but the twisted drama does a solid job at truncating Swamp Thing's origin without compromising it. Anyone expecting a traditional comic book romp may be disappointed, but creature feature lovers and sci-fi devotees will have a ball. Number 9. Helix. Cameron Persandez's mystery drama follows a group of scientists who venture to the Arctic to study a potentially world-ending virus. Straight off the bat, Helix plunges viewers into a riveting story filled with intrigue and dread. The Arctic setting creates a permanent sense of claustrophobia, since there's nowhere for the ensemble to go when the proverbial crap hits the fan. The series excels, thanks to its fast-paced action and unexpected plot twists. Even though the premise sounds predictable, viewers are constantly kept on their toes, since the story goes in directions nobody sees coming. Billy Campbell delivers a strong performance as Alan, the doctor trying to resolve the outbreak. The supporting cast are top-notch, especially Shogun's Hiroyuki Sanada, who's endlessly entertaining as the enigmatic Dr. Hatake. The evolving character dynamics keep the audience engaged as alliances shift and new threats emerge. One of Helix's standout features is its unique approach to the blending horror and sci-fi. Rather than relying on cheap jump scares, the show builds an unsettling atmosphere through psychological tension and well-executed visual storytelling. Helix may have been preemptively cancelled, but that shouldn't deter fans of the genre from checking it out. Number 8. From. It's no surprise From has the same producers as Lost, considering the addictive drama should leave anyone hooked by the end of the first episode. John Griffin's gripping series kicks off with Jim Matthews and his family wandering into a mysterious town after getting lost in the woods. When they attempt to leave, they find themselves returning to the same place every time. After speaking to the locals, Jim's family realise nobody who enters the town is able to get out. Just when it sounds like things couldn't get worse, Jim learns the area is invaded by hostile forces each night. The performances, particularly from Harold Perrineau as the town's reluctant leader, are outstanding, bringing a real sense of urgency and humanity to the surreal story. The supporting cast is equally strong, each character adding layers to the unsettling narrative. What sets From apart is its ability to balance deep mythology with heart-pounding horror. Although some subplots drag, every revelation generates more questions, compelling you to keep watching. From puts a heavy emphasis on the underlying mystery, so we won't be saying anything else, since it's best to go in blind. Number 7. The Outer Limits, 1995. 1995's The Outer Limits is an incredible reimagining of the 1960s anthology series. The remake moved away from the Monster of the Week formula of its predecessor and instead highlighted the dangers of science, which made it more relevant. In recent years, AI has advanced exponentially and society has become overtly reliant on technology, making this version of The Outer Limits more relevant now than when it premiered. On top of that, there's a greater emphasis on horror this time around, thanks to the incredible practical effects in CGI. The storylines centering around mutations, body horror, and aliens aren't just creepy, but genuinely haunting. The show's ability to weave science fiction with emotional depth makes it not just a visual treat, but a cerebral experience. Even though 1995's Outer Limits isn't discussed that much nowadays, it remains a hidden gem in the world of science fiction television. It's a must-watch for any fan of the genre, since it invites us to think beyond the limits of what we know. Number 6. The X-Files. Though sci-fi horror was once a niche market, The X-Files obliterated that notion after it became one of the most celebrated series on television. Although the Monster of the Week structure can feel repetitive, The X-Files sidestepped this issue by gradually building its overarching mystery. Chris Carter's writing team found ingenious ways to work around problems, which led to some of the show's most defining moments, like how they created the Scully abduction subplot when Gillian Anderson was unavailable. Also, it feels like the series wouldn't have the same spark if anyone else had been cast in the lead roles besides David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. Their slow burn chemistry is so enrapturing, some people tuned in every week purely to see the banter between the will they won't they colleagues. Though The X-Files had its fair share of filler, these episodes were rarely half-assed. In fact, standalone episodes like Home, Bad Blood, and Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose had some of the most emotional, creative, and outright terrifying storylines. It may have gone out with a whimper, and not every plotline worked, especially the Cat People episode, but The X-Files is a must-watch for sci-fi advocates. Number 5. Stranger Things. Stranger Things was infamously rejected by numerous studios because the lead characters were children. Ironically, that detail became the show's greatest strength. Though the 1980s nods are executed masterfully and the lingering mystery is fascinating, it's the camaraderie between Eleven and her friends that makes Stranger Things work. Chief Hopper and Joyce are great to watch, but the story wouldn't have the same oomph if it wasn't seen through the lens of kids. Rather than cramming in every 1980s reference for the sake of nostalgia, Stranger Things incorporates music, movies, and board games from that era into the overarching narrative. Although references to the Neverending Story, E.T., the D&D Moral Panic, and Eggos should feel forced, they're some of the series' most memorable moments. Who wasn't on the edge of their seat during that running up that hill sequence? My heart still hasn't come down from that one. Even though Season 4 retconned the hell out of the Upside Down and the origin of Eleven's powers, it was for the best, since it created a more personal relationship between our telekinetic heroine and her arch-nemesis, Vecna. If it wasn't for that one annoying episode, you know the one I'm talking about, Stranger Things would be borderline perfect. Number 4. Black Mirror. Though Black Mirror isn't pure sci-fi horror, the stories that fit into this category tend to leave the biggest impression. Charlie Brooker's soul-crushing satire has tackled many aspects of modern society, including VR, reality television, deepfakes, and AI, highlighting how emerging ideas and inventions can be repurposed for deplorable reasons. Though these issues have been done to death, Black Mirror rises above its peers since it highlights how technology influences the masses rather than the tech itself. Since the show kicked off back in 2011, certain episodes that emphasize celebrity worship, cancel culture, trolling, technology addiction, and mob justice seem weirdly prophetic. Even when the dark anthology isn't conventionally scary, the way it explores the sinister side of humanity should leave anyone rattled for days. The White Christmas special isn't horror, but it might as well be. The few episodes that have a happy ending, like USS Callister and Black Museum, are still freaky since they demonstrate how easily technology can tap into and amplify the cruelest side of humanity. Despite the fact Black Mirror is deemed science fiction, it bleeds closer to reality every passing day. Number 3. Twin Peaks and Twin Peaks: The Return. Unlike other entries on this list, it isn't immediately clear Twin Peaks is sci-fi horror. It initially comes across as a quirky detective drama, with eccentric FBI agent Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, overseeing a murder investigation. Slowly but surely, Twin Peaks evolves into something else entirely. Rather than untangling a grounded mystery, Dale finds himself exploring other dimensions and battling a Garmin Bojia-gorging spirit called Bob. On paper, blending murder mystery, soap opera melodrama, and interdimensional horror shouldn't work, and yet Twin Peaks pulled it off without a hitch. Although Twin Peaks seemingly concluded with 2 seasons and a movie, David Lynch and Mark Frost returned 25 years later with another 18 episodes. Rather than creating a nostalgia-driven revival, Twin Peaks: The Return takes the groundbreaking original series to new heights, dialing up the surrealism exponentially. Although some scenes are utterly deranged, they're sure to have anyone's undivided attention. Although some people were expecting a more traditional continuation, any true Lynch fan knew The Return was going to be insane to the point where it made the original seem normal. There were a ton of questions left unanswered by the time Twin Peaks abruptly ended again, but we wouldn't have it any other way. David Lynch, you are missed. Number 2. The Twilight Zone. After more than 60 years, you'd think The Twilight Zone would show its age. On the contrary, Rod Serling's legendary anthology feels fresher than ever. Sure, the special effects and costumes are dated, but the jaw-dropping stories haven't lost one iota of their relevancy or power. The Twilight Zone is renowned for its eerie music, sharp writing, and creepy atmosphere. The casting directors should also be commended, since the show had a myriad of pre-fame stars. However, it's the penny drop moments that made The Twilight Zone iconic. Even though there are countless films that have been immortalised by their twists, many were inspired by The Twilight Zone. In fact, Planet of the Apes' gobsmacking ending was directly taken from the episode I Shot an Arrow into the Air. After watching a few dozen episodes, you'd assume you would pick up on the pattern and spot the twist coming a mile away. But due to the tight scripts and flawless misdirection, nearly every storyline catches out the most attentive viewers. Although not every storyline is great, it's remarkable how many of the 150 plus episodes stand the test of time. Number 1, Dark. In the first episode of this German drama, a group of kids head into a local cave hoping to find a drug stash. When they re-emerge, they find themselves transported decades into the past. As hard as it is to believe, the children's lives become infinitely stranger from there. Though Dark dropped on Netflix with little fanfare, it garnered a reputation as one of the smartest and most unnerving shows out there. Since it deals with a lot of dense concepts and scientific mumbo-jumbo, Dark could have been bogged down with excessive exposition. Instead, Dark relies on visual storytelling, so it never feels like it's holding your hand while unweaving its intricate narrative. Every episode concludes with a profound revelation that recontextualizes the narrative. These epiphanies are subtly telegraphed, so viewers feel rewarded if they worked them out. Despite the sci-fi premise, Dark feels profoundly believable, thanks to the superb writing, impeccable world building, fleshed out characters, and palpable performances. As incredible as Dark is, it can't be fully appreciated until it's rewatched. Only on a second viewing do you pick up on the subtle foreshadowing and double meanings behind innocuous sounding dialogue. Even though Dark leaves an impression long after the credits roll, the impact is far greater the second time round.